So as we're descending toward the Mediterranean plains, you're going to see that, hills becoming greener and greener, and you'll see much more vegetation. Well, part of it is that water is not as scarce here as around Jerusalem. Jerusalem is pretty much the beginning of the Judean wilderness, Judean desert. But also due to the fact that this is the place where that Israel is settled when the state was founded, and they begin the program of planting of the trees and various greens, not only to beautify but also to preserve the environment. And that's one of the positive achievements, I think. A lot of the trees are not necessarily native to this area, they were brought from Europe. And also you're going to see a lot of fir trees, which are not necessarily where they were present to the local environment, but there were not as many of them. And as I explained to you in Galilee, they grow much faster. So if they're planted and they grow, you can have a whole forest of spruce trees or various type of other fir trees. Of course, the downside is if there is a fire in the forest due to the accident or for some other reason, or after the lightning struck, the whole area burns very quickly and becomes deforested. So the fire spreads through the full forest much faster. But it's very appealing to an eye, and it's rather beautiful that look just on the barren hills. So we can have a little bit of imagination of how it may have looked like. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the remains of the armed vehicles, Israeli armed vehicles that were destroyed during the war of 1948. Arab countries resented the fact that the State of Israel was created. Of course, it was done without consideration of the local population. It was a decision of three world powers, United States, Soviet Union, and UK. Local population was quite brutally removed in some cases. For instance, on some occasion where the military transports came with equipment in the port of Jaffa, and Jaffa is an old town that was inhabited mainly by Christian Arabs. The Jewish army, in an attempt to get to the seaport, as it was stated, leveled the buildings by the artillery fire without letting the residents fully ahead of them, without any forewarning. So when we are looking at the roots of the current conflict, we really have to consider both sides of the story. There was a lot of unfair things done to the Palestinians, Arabs, Christians, and Muslims alike, who were removed and were made refugees from their own homes and from their own land. You probably heard a lot about the issue of returning of the refugees who live in Jordan and Syria and Lebanon. A lot of these refugees and their families living there since 1948 or 1967. And many of them were forced to flee their houses, not that they don't want to live where they are, they were just fleeing military activity, but they were never permitted to come back. And in particular, such stories, of course, about 1967, that Arabs already lived in largely Israeli-dominated areas, but when conflict broke out, they were escaping, and when the war stopped, they were not permitted to come back. And this is one of the pending issues, and there is no easy resolution seemed to be at hand.
about this place. We're here in a very ancient place which is called Emmaus. Maybe you know that in the Holy Land there are three places which pretend to be Emmaus, where Jesus came after his resurrection. But this place is the most ancient Christian tradition. This place also is very well known in the Jewish history, the Jewish tradition. The first mention of this place we find in the first book of Maccabees. This is a Jewish history book written in the 1st century BC, which describes the events of the 2nd century BC. In the 2nd century BC there was a war here between Jews and the Greeks. And the Jews were led by Judas the Maccabee, the Jewish leader. And the Greeks came here to occupy the country. They came from Syria. And they wanted to prevent Jews from celebrating their religion, practicing their religion. And the Jews revolted against them, and their leader was Judas the Maccabee. And in Emmaus there was a battle, an important battle where Jews destroyed the Greeks. The battle was somewhere here in the plain. So this is the first mention of Emmaus in history, in the year 160 before Christ. So there was already a Jewish village called Emmaus. We know also from the Jewish tradition, from Talmud, which is the collection of the Jewish tradition, the Talmud of Jerusalem said that Emmaus is found on the border between mountain and the plain. You see here we're exactly on the border. From here starts the mountain towards the Jerusalem, and from here starts the plain, goes to the Mediterranean. So we are in the Mediterranean, Jerusalem and the Mediterranean. The problem of the identification of Emmaus, there is the distance given between Jerusalem and Emmaus is 60 stadia. It means 12 kilometers. But here we are at 30 kilometers from Jerusalem. And the fact is that there are also very ancient manuscripts of the Gospel of Luke which have 160 stadia, which means 30 kilometers. For example, the very good quality manuscript which is called Codex Sinaiticus is the most ancient, entire, complete manuscript of all the Bible in Greek, which was found in the Sinai monastery of St. Catherine in Sinai. This manuscript has 160 stadia, so 30 kilometers. But the problem is that the manuscripts which have the longer distance are only several. There are only several manuscripts like this. But most parts have 60 stadia. That's why when in the 16th century the Bible started to be printed, those who started to print the Bible chose the shorter distance, because most part of the manuscripts are shorter. But the Christian tradition has always identified Emmaus here, at this place, which is 30 kilometers from Jerusalem. We have the testimony of the fathers of the church, the most ancient church scholars or bishops or writers who consider this place as the true place where Jesus appeared after his resurrection. We have first of all the testimony of St. Eusebius, who was the bishop of Caesarea in the 3rd and 4th century, in the end of the Roman period and the beginning of the Byzantine period. And he composed the geographical dictionary of the Holy Land, which is called Onomasticon. And he mentions all the names, geographical names found in the Bible, and explains where it is in his time. So he says there in his book, which appeared, this book was written in the end of the 3rd century, or the beginning of the 4th century. It says, Emmaus today is Nicopolis, the famous city in Palestine. So Nicopolis is here. This is the Roman and Greek-Roman name of this place, Nicopolis. The Jewish name is Emmaus, and the Romans called it Nicopolis. So on the time of Eusebius of Caesarea, this place was called Nicopolis. So he says Emmaus today is Nicopolis. So this is very important testimony. And we have also the testimony of Jerome, Saint Jerome, who was a monk in Bethlehem, and he translated the Bible into Latin. He visited this place in 386 AD, and he says that he saw here the house of Cleophas. Cleophas was one of the disciples who was walking with Jesus and who received him in his house. So in the year 386, Saint Jerome saw here this house. So this house was venerated by the Christians here. There is no doubt that Jerome was here, because he describes very well his way, what he visited before Emmaus and what he visited after Emmaus, so it must be here. So We don't know exactly now where this house was, but probably the house was venerated by the first Christians, like in Capernaum. There is the house of St. Peter, which was venerated, and after a church was built upon it. So the same here, house of Cleophas was venerated, and after this the church was built upon it. So what we see here now, the map. In the Byzantine time, there were two churches here. The Byzantine time in the Holy Land started in the 4th century in 325 and ended with the coming of the Muslims in 640. This is the Byzantine time, between the 4th and the 7th century. There were two churches here, one smaller on the left and one bigger on the right. So we have here the ruins of these two churches. The smaller church was here on the left. What is left of this church is the baptistry, the place of the baptism. And the bigger church was on the right. From the bigger Byzantine church, what we see here now are the three apses, the wall with three apses. This was a very big church, which was going up to here. This was the entrance of the bigger church. We found also some mosaics on this church. These two walls which are closer to us, these two walls, were built later by Crusaders. The Crusaders in the 12th century, these nuns. And here we see a very famous map of the Holy Land, which is found in Jordan, in the town of Nadaba, for the church. It is on the floor of the church. We see here Jerusalem, the Dead Sea, Jordan, Jericho, Great Nicopolis. Nicopolis in Greek means the city of victory. This is the place the Romans came to this place. And the word Emmaus itself is a Jewish name, Hebrew name. It comes from the Hebrew word Hamad, which means a hot spring, hot water. But today there is no hot water. The name. We have also a very ancient map, which is called Peutinger table. Peutinger is the man who has this map in his collection. So this is a very ancient map from the 2nd century Roman map, where Emmaus, Amawante, in Latin, is at the distance of 19 miles from Jerusalem. So it confirms the distance of 30 kilometers. We can see now the ruins and mosaics. Как говорит по-русски, все понимают по-английски?
Нет.
Еще раз объяснить по-русски.
Я перевожу. Кто не понимает, я стараюсь бегать между людьми и объяснять по-русски.
So in the Byzantine time there was a church here with the baptistry, and the second church was here. The churches were probably connected. We don't know exactly why there were two churches here. Maybe this church was the house of Cleophas, but there is no evidence. So the baptistry originally was 76 centimeters higher, so it was deeper. And the archaeologists found it in the end of the 19th century. It was still higher. It was not destroyed, but it was destroyed later during the First World War by the Turkish soldiers. The Turkish army built their camp here during the First World War, and the Turks destroyed it. But still, we use it sometimes for the baptisms of adults and children. So it still can be used. Yeah, there, under the tree, you see there the water system on this side. You see the water system, it's Byzantine water system. So here in this country there is no rain in summer. So during the winter when it rains, people were collecting water in cisterns and using it during the summer. So you see this system, and also there is a channel in the wall, you see the channel which was bringing water to the baptistry. The baptistry has also a little basin, but nobody knows exactly what is it for. Some say the little basin was for the baptism of babies. Maybe it was also the aim of this basin was to measure the level of the water in the pool. So, yeah, we have Italian book there, but they will finish soon on this show. There was a bishop in Emmaus. So this place was the original center in the Byzantine time. It was a Roman in Byzantine time. This was the original center, so there was a bishop here, Bishop of Nicopolis. We find the signature of the Bishop of Nicopolis in the Acts of the Nicene Council.
Huh.
325. So the Bishop of Nicopolis. There is another Nicopolis in Asia Minor, but this bishop, who signed this, the Council of Nicaea, was from here. It's more or less here. So these walls are very, very big, which is not typical for the Byzantine time. It's more typical for the Roman times. But so the archaeologists first thought that it was a Roman building. But today the archaeologists say that according to its form, it's more or less 7th century Byzantine church. But maybe the Byzantines reused the Roman stones from another building.
That we may be counted worthy to hear the Holy Gospel, let us pray to the Lord. Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy. Right, let us hear the Holy Gospel. Peace be to all. And to your spirit. Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to thee, O Lord, glory to time, 2 disciples were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him, and he said to them, "What is this conversation which you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since this happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. And they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." And he said to them, "O foolish men and slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And they drew near to the village of which they were going. He appeared to be going further, but they constrained him, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." And he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished out of their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the way, and he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 gathered together and said, those who were with them who said, the Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. And they told what had happened on the way and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread.
Двое из них шли в селение, отстоящее стадии на 60 от Иерусалима, называемое Эмаус, разговаривали между собой о всех сих событиях. И когда они разговаривали и рассуждали между собой, сам Иисус, приблизившись, пошел с ними. Но глаза их были удержаны, так что они не узнали его. Он же сказал им: «О чем это вы, идя, рассуждаете между собой, и отчего вы печальны?» Один из них именем Клеопа сказал ему в ответ: «Неужели ты, один из пришедших в Иерусалим, не знаешь о пришедшем в нем в эти дни?» И сказал им о чем. Они сказали ему, что было с Иисусом Назарянином, который был пророк, сильный в деле и слове пред Богом и пред всем народом. Как предали его превосвященники и начальники наши для суждения на смерть и распяли его. А мы надеялись было, что он есть тот, который должен избавить Израиля. Но совсем тем уж третий день ныне, как это произошло. Но и некоторые женщины из наших изумили нас, они были рано у гроба и не нашли тело его. И придя сказывали, что они видели явление ангелов, которые говорят, что он жив. И пошли некоторые из наших по гробу и нашли так, как женщины говорили, но его не видели. Когда он сказал им: несмысленные и медлительные сердцем, чтобы веровать всему, что предсказывали пророки, не так ли надлежало пострадать Христу и войти в славу свою? И, начав от Моисея и всех пророков, изъяснял им сказанное о нем во всем Писании. И приблизились они к тому селению, в которое шли, он показывал им вид, что хочет идти далее. Но они удерживали его, говоря: «Останьте с нами, потому что день уже склонился к вечеру». И он вошел и остался с ними. И когда он возлежал с ними, то, взяв хлеб, благословил, преломив, и подал им. Тогда открылись у них глаза, и они узнали его. Но он стал невидим для них, и они сказали друг другу: не горело ли в нас сердце наше, когда он говорил нам по дороге, когда изъяснял нам Писание? И, став в тот же час, возвратились в Иерусалим и нашли вместе 11 апостолов, бывших с ними, которые говорили, что Господь истинно воскрес и явился Симону. И они рассказывали о происшедшем на пути, и как он был узнан ими в преломлении хлеба.
Слава Тебе, Господи, слава Тебе.
I was talking at breakfast about this journey to Emmaus. I was so happy we were coming here because years ago, when I was an undergraduate at Bucknell University, I had to take a course in world religion. And so we read books on all different kinds of religions, and one of the books I had to read to pass the test was a book by a Jewish philosopher, theologian by the name of Abraham Heschel. And the book is called God in Search of Man. The book tells about a Jewish approach to God that is not a way of a philosophical exercise, but a lived experience. And he says that the way the Jew came to understand, not that God existed, but that God was looking for him. The experience of God was three ways. He said, first, you have to grow in awe, the sense of wonder. Second, the sense of worship, and then mitzvah, doing good. Okay? And I think about this, and many years later I become priest, and of course I study Orthodox theology, and much of it is the same idea of the experience of God. But this gospel, it has those keys in it, because if you take the three keys Heschel's talking about, awe, worship, and mitzvah, you have the disciples going on the way to Emmaus, and they're in a sense of awe, not of joy, but of dismay, like the wonder, how could this be? All their hopes are finished, you see, and then all of a sudden comes the stranger, who is the one who they do not recognize, and he begins to explain to them the scripture, which is now worship, the understanding of the word of God. And when they finally come to this place, and it's the end of the day, and there's nowhere for him to go, they say, well, come and join us and have the dinner, and they're breaking the bread. They're doing good, they've discovered God. And so for us as believers, always to grow in awe, to thank God for everything, how great God is, give thanks to God, and then do good, and you discover God's presence. It's part of the experience of life, and so it ties into this gospel in a very powerful way. So I wanted to tell you, because I love this. Every Sunday when we have this gospel, I say, I remember this from my undergraduate studies.
Есть еще время.
So we shall see now the ancient tombs. Yeah, we shall see the ancient Jewish tombs from the village of Emmaus. So we shall see. Jesus. Like the tomb, Jewish tomb, the tomb of Jesus described in the Gospel with the big stone which closed the entrance. So, if you go today to the Holy Sepulchre, you will not see a tomb like this, because the original tomb of Jesus was destroyed by Muslims in the 11th century. What today you see in the Holy Sepulchre is only the base of the rock of the tomb. Empty cans of British beer. Also the stone is here. What is unique in this tomb is that it has a second level. And the second level is a Roman level. This is a Jewish level. Tomb is upon Jewish tomb, because this town of Emmaus, or this village of Emmaus, had two periods in its history. First the Jewish village, and after the Jewish revolt against Romans in 135, the revolt of Bar Kokhba against the Romans vanquished the Jews and expelled the Jews from Palestine. And they came to live here. In the beginning of the 2nd century, the Jews were expelled from here, and the Romans settled here, pagans, and so there are Roman tombs. In the book of Joshua, it is said that during the war of the sons of Israel against the kings of Canaan kings, Joshua stopped the sun and moon. Joshua ordered the sun and moon to stop during the battle to make the day longer, so he can vanquish his enemies. So the sun and moon stopped in the valley of Ayalon. So it was here. It's in the book of Joshua. So we can connect this story with the story of Jesus appearing at Emmaus, because Jesus chose to appear here, but this place is, for the Jews, it is connected with the glorious history, with the victory of the enemies. So Jesus appearing at Emmaus, it can be also the sign of his victory. And so what we see here, not far from here is Tel Aviv already, the Mediterranean Sea. Agnès, ma sœur.
Very nice.
Father Jim.
Yes.
So, yes, we have also some ancient old photos. And see here the excavations, the big excavations which were held here in the 1920s. You see here that the place was, this was the Arabic village of Emmaus. And you see that the whole region was completely deserted. There was nothing here, there were no trees. All these trees which you see here now were planted by Jews. Before, in the Turkish times, it was not. 1960s, 1970s, like initiatives from lay people to start to live in communities. Because today, especially in France, where it's very secularized, and the Christians want to form communities. And to live like first Christians, when everything is in common. This Vatican is recognizing. In fact, the recognition of the Pope is not necessary for existing community. The recognition of one bishop is enough. So our community was first recognized only by one bishop in France. But later, when it became international, the bishop told us to receive the recognition from the Pope himself. So when we asked the recognition from Vatican, they told us to make some reforms, because we had to separate nuns from the monks, and we have to separate families. The married people must not live like monks. They have to have their own money, and they have to give, because still now we live all together, working together, praying together, and the married people didn't have any salaries. But today now the Catholic Church tells us we have to separate and married people have to live like married people, like families, and monks. So we have to reform, become more serious. Before we were like a group of young people just
So you said you're international. Does that mean there are communities patterned after your community throughout the world?
Yes,
How many are there?
yes. We are. First, it was only in France, but very quickly we came to Israel, and now we are present also in the United States, in Denver, Colorado, and we are present also in New Zealand and English-speaking countries. Very many countries in Europe: Germany, Italy, Belgium, Hungary, many. And also we are present in French-speaking Africa, in South America, Vietnam, China. But usually we live in small communities of 20 people in houses in the country, not in the big towns.